You're listening to the Music Book Podcast with your host, Marc Masters.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Music Book Podcast. I'm Marc Masters. I've written 2 books about music, No Wave, published in 2008, and High Bias, The Distorted History of the Cassette Tape, published in 2023. On this podcast, I talk to music book authors about how they get from their first idea to a finished book and all the decisions they make along the way. So this time around, I got to talk with Josh Bloom. He's the author of The Apples in Stereo, published in December of 2025 by J-Card Press. J-Card publishes short biographies of bands of all kinds. So far, they've done books on Brainiac, De La Soul, Laughing Hyenas, and Josh's entry is about the Denver band The Apples in Stereo, who began in the early 90s and were part of the Elephant Six collective, along with Neutral Milk Hotel, Olivia Tremor Control, of Montreal, a bunch of other bands. Josh has known members of Apples in Stereo for decades, particularly their main leader, Robert Schneider. And his book's a mixture of informational bio and first-person narrative, written in a conversational, often funny tone that makes it entertaining and edifying for both longtime fans and for those unfamiliar with the Apples in Stereo. As he writes, because Robert and I have a history as on-off, on-again friends, I can speak from personal experience to complete a picture of him as the more emotionally complex person and therefore songwriter, recording artist, and producer I know him to be. This is in contrast to how I've seen him portrayed in media coverage, books, and films about the Apples in Stereo and the Elephant Six recording company. What this means for you is the potential to read more deeply into the songs that comprise the Apples in Stereo catalog. So this is Josh's first book, but he's been involved in music a long time. He founded the Fanatic Promotion Company, started in the late 90s. And as you'll hear in our conversation, he's transitioning away from that a little bit. I think he still works in PR, but he's trying to find sort of a different role with his music fandom and expertise. And this book is part of that new direction for him. It's pretty exciting. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast, please email me at musicbookpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Instagram. Our handle there is @themusicbookpodcast. So here's my chat with Josh Bloom. I hope you dig it. Give me some of the origin story behind this. Did you know about J-Card and pitch them an idea? Did someone suggest it to you? How did the whole thing come about?
Well, I have been making a soft exit out of the music industry over the past few years. I've been doing Fanatic Promotion for almost 30 years. And I
Wow.
kind of, the industry has changed quite a bit. And I kind of got to the point of feeling, I kind of feel like I did all I wanted to do in the industry. So as I was making this sort of transition emotionally, intellectually, Jeff at J-Card reached out, hey, I got a book coming out about AFI. Would you be interested in doing PR for it? And I said, yes, but I'm kind of starting to whittle down the amount of projects I'm working on. But if you're interested, I'll send you a proposal. And
cool.
thinking, after that phone call, I thought to myself, part of me said, I hope he says, no, don't send me a proposal. And part of me says, if I do send a proposal, I hope he rejects it.
Right.
Because I knew what it would mean. But he said to send a proposal, and I did. And he was like, yeah, no, looks good. I'll send you a contract.
Oh, wow.
That's what happened. He sent the contract. I signed the contract right away. And then I let the check sit on my desk for about 2 months. Because I was like, Josh, if you cash the check, then you're going to spend the next year of your life. Because I'd never written a book before, so I knew, you're going to have to put everything you have into this.
Sure.
And that's what I did. Yeah, that's how it happened.
Cool. And what was the proposal like? How much did you put in that in terms of like researchy kind of things, or proposed a chapter outline or things like that, or did he have a form that he wanted you to do it in, or did you do that all on your own? Or?
It's funny. I've looked at the 33 1/3 proposal specs, and I'm like, I wouldn't be able to even achieve the proposal part of it. His ask is in terms of a proposal was enough for me to say this alone will take some effort. Writing samples, a chapter outline. Just a good few days worth of gathering materials and really kind of thinking it through. That was the requirement. I could tell even before he and I talked about possibly doing PR, I went to write to his website, and I saw aesthetically, and knowing that he's also a published author, I was like, okay, well, this is something I would be honored to be associated with. This, it was clear that this was well organized and serious. And so I wanted to step up to that level. So his ask of me, as a potential author, was, what I would expect from someone who obviously was doing something serious.
That makes sense. So when he gave you the yes, did he come to you with any, like, here's what I liked about it, and I'd like you to go in that direction, or was it basically bluntly, great, I think you can do it, now go off on your own and do it?
Yeah, I wrote him an email the other day saying I hope future experiences with editors are as good as this, because he really kind of he really had the perfect combination of staying out of my way but encouraging me, but letting me know here's what I need all throughout. In fact, at the beginning I said, hey, can you send me a couple of the recent books so I can kind of get an idea? And he said, I will, but you don't need to read them, because I really want you to just like do your own thing and write your own book and not feel like it has to be one way or another. So, that was the approach.
Part of the reason I asked that specifically is because what's relatively unique about your book and about your whole situation is that you're writing about a band who not only know super well, but Robert, one of the main, I mean, we could say he's the main guy behind it, we could say he's not, but obviously he did a lot of what happened in the band. You're friends with him, so that sets up a dynamic that doesn't always happen in books. And there's multiple ways you could approach that. You could have written an omniscient narrator kind of book and just put in the beginning, by the way, I know him. Or you could go all the way and have it be like my life with Robert Schneider. You landed somewhere in the middle of that, but you didn't try to like pretend that, just because I'm friends with him, I'm still going to be totally objective in this book. Part of the story of the book is your relationship with him somewhat, and you document your back and forths with him while you're writing it and things like that, and what you knew about him before and what you've known about him in this process. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a background for people who haven't read the book yet. But I'm curious, how did you kind of conceive of that aspect of the book? I imagine it's something you had to decide pretty early on. How am I going to handle this aspect of being personally friends with Robert?
Yeah, I mean, in that 2 months of the check sitting on the table, I had to come to terms with the fact, like, Josh, you're not going to be able to write The Apples in Stereo formed in Denver, Colorado. It's like
right.
You're not, if you try to do that, it's not going to get finished. So I had to kind of come to terms with myself of like, you're going to have to write not only what you just described, which is the truth of that relationship, but also write from how I am as a person. The material is going to come from speaking about your perspective wherever that wherever that may fall. I guess, if I was ever going to write another book like this again, I guess a contingency would be with the artist, like, hey, I'm going to treat you as if I have a relationship with you, because otherwise
right.
work's never going to get done. Plus, you're never going to really give me what's interesting. So luckily in this first example, Robert knows me well enough as a person to know, like, oh, if I'm going to get into this with Josh, he's not gonna really like allow me to skip away without hard inquiry. And lucky for me, he was up for that. He's far enough out from those years and so on where it's still visceral and real to him, but he doesn't or seem to mind being very, very candid about his life in terms of what I'm asking him about.
That's great. Yeah, that comes across for sure. And and I was also curious about when you first told him that you were doing this and that you wanted to, talk to him about it, and the way you were approaching it, how that all went. I mean, it sounds like he liked it, right? He liked the idea, but did you sense anything like, well, this, we can get into this, but we can't get into that, or any of that kind of stuff? Or...
Well, I mentioned in the book there's a couple of things that I felt nervous about. I say it in the book that one was his relationship with Hillary and being there, and I'm not talking out of school. When he tried to convince me, like, oh, it wasn't that bad, I was like, I saw some things with my own eyes, bro. There was his relationship, with Hillary, and his relationship with Jeff from Neutral Milk Hotel. both their working relationship and personal relationship. And those were things I knew. And he was very good about saying off the record, you know, here
Sure.
and there, not often, but here and there,
Hmm.
because you might ask, like, well, why would he say off the record? Why would he just not tell you? Well, he felt
Hmm.
that even if he was telling me something that was off the record, it would color my perception and my feelings
Hmm.
about other things he was telling me about on the record.
Hmm.
So I do appreciate that he said those things, but I told him you know, very early on, hey, I submitted a proposal to write
Mm.
this book about the apples in
Hmm.
stereo, and he's always known and for being very encouraging of artists and
Hmm.
writers. So his attitude is like, yay, congratulations,
That's cool. That's
Mhm.
awesome that he's like that. Yeah. And so at the start of it, obviously you talked to him a decent bit and probably did throughout the process. What were your other kind of starting plans in terms of you had an outline in your proposal,
Yeah.
so I imagine that was part of the helped you structure what you were going to research and what you're going to. But I'm just curious what your first steps were in the actual writing of the book.
Well, I did submit an outline and I kept checking back
Hmm.
in with it, like, am I
Uh-huh.
anywhere in this outline?
Right.
And I guess I was kind of,
Uh-huh.
but it really came down to what I thought was essential to write about. It was very, very important to me. I've worked with Hillary and her band for many, many years now, and it was very important to me to kind of get her the credit I think she deserves, or at least to
Uh-huh.
create an avenue for her to get the recognition I think she deserves. And in fact, when I was doing PR for her band, that was kind of my angle. One of the big gets was a large
Mhm.
article in the Westward out in Denver about her and her history with Elephant Six and so on, because I just felt justice hadn't been served. So I wanted to
Mhm.
make sure I knew I was going to write a chapter just about Hillary. I knew, that John and Eric, John Hill and Eric Allen from the band had not
Mhm.
really gotten the recognition. So I wanted them to include that. And there were other concepts that I get into specifically, like I didn't include the outline, and I'm going to write a chapter about how I thought Elijah Wood putting out their records was kind of like, some sort of like desperate try to attempt
Uh-huh.
to get aligned with one of the biggest movie stars in the world. I didn't put that in the outline, but as I went on, I felt like this is interesting. It's an opportunity to include a famous person in here, but also to kind of go to the mat with sort of a just an accusation, if you will, that
Right.
which
Right.
I address as being a cynical person. I was like,
Uh-huh.
this looks like a tiny bit of a sellout to me, and so obviously that wasn't in the initial thought, but as time went on, I was like, oh, I can't really relegate this to a paragraph or
Right.
this is kind of a chapter. And so that's kind of how it went. It really was it really took shape as I was going along, which a
Hmm.
lot of my
Cool.
writing
Cool.
does in general.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, I think that's a thing that's I think a challenge for every writer is to how much do I stick to this? The outline had a purpose. It wasn't just throwing it randomly. So I gotta
Yeah,
trust that a little bit, but at the same time, like I can't lock myself into it if it's not working. So
yeah, the outline literally was, I mean, maybe it's embarrassing, but it literally was like getting signed, moving to
right.
Denver or something, and it's
Sure,
just
sure.
like that's not as intriguing as Elijah Wood.
Right, right. So one of the interesting things, mentioning Hillary and her, having her do, and one of the kind of points of this band is when she wasn't in it anymore, and you kind of you personally have, what's the best way for me? But what I think the interesting through lines in the book is that you very early up on you're upfront about you don't like the later stuff as much as the earlier stuff, and most of it has to do with Hillary not being on it, but also other things too. And I thought that was cool to be that upfront about it, first of all, but it also kind of becomes this theme, well, not a theme, but like one of the narrative threads through the book is always kind of checking in on yourself and saying, am I being any more convinced that this later stuff is,
Hmm.
because Robert's going to bat for it like crazy, which he
Yeah,
should. He made the
yeah,
music, and it culminates in even you finally have a chapter where you really just say, can I change my mind about this record and
Hmm.
stuff? So I'm curious how you went about sort of deciding to weave that through. And were you thinking of it as like from the beginning as something you were going to use as a narrative through the book, or did it sort of naturally evolve as you wrote the book? Or
I mean, I'm laughing because I remember these texts with Robert, and early on saying, I haven't listened to those records because even though Hillary is actually on the next to last record, she left the band right before it came out, so it kind of just poisoned it for me anyway.
Mhm.
Like I'm like, oh, well, it must be bad. Um, uh,
Right.
uh, and so, I'm laughing because I just remember early on the text with Robert and letting him know, like, this is how I feel about
Mhm.
those records, and I haven't listened to them.
Uh-huh.
And he just
Mhm.
started defending them. So, but his defense was genuine.
Yeah.
So I just thought, again, just in terms of entertaining myself, I was going to say before, like as I was writing, the
Mhm.
criteria was, am I entertained? Am I laughing? Am I enjoying
Uh-huh.
this story that's coming out of me?
Uh-huh.
And so
Uh-huh.
when that happened, I was like, this is kind of a funny sort of through line in terms of like setting up some kind of like drama,
Uh-huh.
like,
Yeah,
will
yeah.
he or won't he? Will he hate these records? Should I
Right.
skip ahead where he shits all over these records or something like that?
Right.
Um,
Right.
that's how that came about. And I did
Uh-huh.
approach that, I knew that chapter was coming, and I was like, I know I'm going to really going to listen to these. Like I'm going to be okay with if I feel one way or another. I didn't, Mark, I felt like I felt really good about the fact that I hadn't made up my mind because I was trying to write a good book. So I was
All
like,
right.
if I make up my mind and I get that chapter and I've already made up my mind, anyone who reads this is going to be like, oh, he already, this is bullshit.
Right.
He knew what he was going to say. So,
Uh-huh.
and I
Yeah.
really didn't. I really, really didn't.
Wow. So that's a real time part of the book, essentially.
Big time. I remember sitting down like, here we go, chapter, here we go. I think it was chapter 8. I'm like, here we go,
Uh-huh.
or chapter
That's
10. I
great.
don't know what it was.
Uh-huh. That's awesome. And I also love the fact that it's like not I mean, because the kind of classic thing would be like, and now I love it. But it wasn't necessarily that. It was just sort of your honest reaction to trying to feel your way through these records that you had a prejudice about, basically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I was really honest about it. I don't
Hmm.
want to give it away necessarily. It's not like it's like that big a deal, but
Right.
what I'm
Right.
saying is like, the criticisms of those records, I felt like they were honest criticisms, like if I was actually writing a criticism of them, but they are from the perspective of everything that came before, which is like, when you sit down to write a review for a record, I don't assume you have the artist in your ear, like trying to convince
Right.
you that this record's great,
Right, right, right. Yeah,
Well,
that's a
I,
unique,
I
unique experience.
I did. I got
Yeah.
a massive sales pitch,
Uh-huh.
while in the midst of writing,
That's pretty awesome. You mentioned or we've been talking a little bit about sort of your relationship with Robert and
Mhm.
your writing about him. One of the things I think was interesting, which you didn't necessarily have to be friends with him to get this across, but it helped and you did a good job of it, is he's just kind of full of contradictions in a good way. Like I never got the sense that like I always felt like he's a good guy from the
Mhm.
very beginning, and he's an interesting guy and he's a creative guy and he cares about his art, and that's sort of enough to like him regardless.
Yeah.
But then there's all these things like he at one point he says I hate money, and then you're like, but you did a Pepsi ad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like by the end of the book he's embracing AI, which is just kind of not something you would expect from
No.
someone who's this committed to his art and things like that. And I just wonder if it was a fun or interesting process to sort of be like, I've got to do justice to the different contradictions about him and other people in the band, the whole band experience, without like trying to paint him as one thing or the other.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, even with friendships where, I, can be the kind of guy who can maybe be more confrontational than is necessary.
Mhm.
In this particular case, he and I had become, close again and friends again after some time apart. And so, in a way, writing this gave me a good excuse to be confrontational. Well, this is for the book, dude.
Sure,
This
sure.
is for the book.
Uh-huh.
So, those were things I was curious about that I might be curious about, without a book. What,
Uh-huh.
dude, how can you,
Yeah.
how can you say you're not into money, but you're took Pepsi money? I would say
Yeah.
that to him without the book, but, with the book, it makes it like, well, this is for the book. I mean, it's like, this is,
Right, right.
um, but yeah, it really just was driven by curiosity, like I would have about anybody. Like, hey, you said this, you did this, you did this, you said this. I'm not judging you, but let me in. What is the thought process here? Help me know you better than I do.
Right, right. Oh yeah, that makes total sense. That's all.
Mhm.
And beyond the sort of the subjectivity, objectivity ideas of knowing the band and stuff like that, there's one of what I think is interesting about your writing style, which you might have done even with any other band, is you're self-reflexive, a little bit like conversational in some places, and you say things like that are about what you're about the process. You're like in certain
Yeah.
places you're like Robert has a reputation for let's fix this, you'll say, which is like what about what you're doing, or you're like at one point I think you said this is not a Hillary advocacy book, even though I think
Yeah.
there are ways almost like you're trying to tell yourself make sure you don't make it that way and something like that.
Yeah.
And there was even one point where there's a couple of places where you're just sort of like Robert said this to me and it kind of made me sad, or it kind of made me smile, or it just that kind of writing I think is interesting, but it's not always easy to pull off. It's sometimes it can be a little overbearing to be hearing those things a lot. I thought you balanced it really well. I'm just curious, is that something that kind of is natural in your writing style, or is it something that you have to kind of keep yourself restricted a little bit, make sure you do it enough but not too much and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it is my writing style. In fact, a friend of mine who's known me my whole life says I write the information about the information. I write
Right.
I write in this very meta kind of style, and just
Hmm.
to be honest, like going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, like if I didn't write it
Hmm.
that way, it would have never gotten
Uh-huh.
finished. But I mean, I do have to, yeah, I kept reminding myself, like, Josh, don't, this
Hmm.
isn't a diary entry,
Right.
like, just
Right.
be careful. And frankly, when I turned it in, I
Hmm.
had to emotionally prepare myself. Josh, you might get a call from Jeff going, yeah, I really do appreciate the effort that you put into this.
Uh-huh.
This is not a book. Like, like this
Uh-huh.
is like this is, for you. This is for you
Uh-huh.
personally to read.
Right.
Um, it's something that I, will always have to,
Hmm.
balance out. Like I didn't, at no point that I like, ooh, don't say that, or that's overboard. But as
Hmm.
I'm writing, I'm like, Josh, you've now stopped talking about the band. Like this is
Right.
now a book about Josh.
Right, right. Well, I think you
So
balanced it perfectly. I mean,
thanks.
I
Yeah.
learned because I
Yeah.
didn't know much about App. I knew who they were. I knew what the
Yeah.
Elephant Six thing was, but I didn't one that super familiar with their music. They were just sort of a little gap in my liking this kind of indie rock or whatever kind of music alternative. So
Yeah.
I did learn a lot about them, and I also felt like, you don't have to know a lot about them to read this book, which is good because on the other hand, I think and someone who does love them is going to be really interested in this book because it gets into details they might not have heard about or thoughts and feelings of Robert and Hillary and different people. But I think it serves both purposes, which I think that's not an easy thing to do. Were you imagining
Well,
sort of a reader of it, or did you were trying to think I got to get everybody who could possibly be interested or whatever?
I'm really grateful for what you just said, because
Yeah.
my thought throughout was, I just don't want anyone to read this and put it down and think that was a waste of my time. Like, I'm like, there's two things I want to accomplish with this. I would like
Mhm.
people who read it to be curious about this band's music, or if they already know their music, to go back to it and listen to it with fresh ears. And two, just to entertain people, so that they read it, they were like, oh, that was a fun couple hours to read.
Uh-huh.
I don't really care about this band that much, or I don't, but I mean, there's some
Uh-huh.
stuff in there that about the music industry, or just how people relate to one another, or artists in general, that I found interesting and was just
Mhm.
purely just entertaining.
Mhm.
I just, that to me, I respect people's time, and I don't want anyone to spend time with something I came up with out of my brain and feel
Uh-huh.
like, wow, that dude, that I will remember you for wasting my time. You know?
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about
Yeah.
that at all. I do think it's totally both entertaining and edifying. I mean, there's definitely more than enough information in the book. It's not like you say, it's not a diary or it's not an impressionistic. It has impressions, but you get a lot of information. Like I didn't know much about his studio. I didn't know much
Hmm.
about the fact that he was kind of the main guy. He has his hands in so many parts of Elephant Six that he ends up being kind of the main character, somewhat of the which I didn't know one way or the other, and that so I learned that. I think there's a lot of interesting things that way, and it's interesting you mentioned the entertaining part because I was also going to ask you like how conscious are you of humor in writing? Because I thought there were funny, very funny parts, and just parts that had a wryness to them that made it more entertaining. So I'm just curious, how is that, again, it was probably somewhat of a natural way of your writing, but I'm wondering how conscious you were of, like, this is kind of funny what I'm writing.
Laughter is my main priority in life.
Cool.
Uh, I think that's all, pretty much all we got
Hmm.
to get to that's all we can get out of this short time we have here. So,
Uh-huh.
again, for me, as I'm writing, like, I'm just like, am I entertained? Am I laughing? And
Right.
just, and while I don't know if that anyone else will find that funny, as long as I'm laughing, then like, it doesn't validate for me, like, oh, well, other people will find this funny, but at least I don't feel as if like I am coming from a place where it's like having to be dragged out of me, or
Hmm.
it feels dour or something like that.
Right.
Like, even when I'm writing about something that is, sensitive, or dark
Hmm.
or whatever, I feel like I'm just instinctually trying to hold on to what I find humorous about the situation,
Hmm.
and just putting that in there. But yeah, no, I mean, humor might want to, I grew up on Steve Martin albums,
Uh-huh.
like, that
That's awesome.
that's my life.
Uh-huh.
That's how I see the
Uh-huh.
world.
Uh-huh. That's cool. Yeah, well, there are parts where I thought were really funny, and just, not necessarily like joke funny, but just like, you refer back to something you'd already mentioned about the band, and it's like, oh, that's pretty clever that to make that connection. And anyway, I thought it worked really well.
I really
Um,
appreciate that.
Cool, cool. And there's one of the things you do in the book too is what you call apple picking, where you'll
Mhm.
sort of jump into a song or a record in
Yeah.
the midst of a chapter and kind of a little bit of analysis, a little bit of description, a little bit of what the band was thinking and that kind of stuff. When I'm curious, what motivated that decision to have that be part of the book, and at what point did you decide? Was that something you were thinking of, from the beginning, or did you realize, oh, hey, this it might be good to just, separate out and jump into specific songs here and there?
I just had this idea one day to send everyone an email saying, just name three Apple songs off the top of your head, the
Uh-huh.
first three songs you think of. Boom.
Uh-huh.
And thankfully, again, Robert gave me a whole bunch of extra because he didn't follow the assignment. He gave me three songs, then he
Right.
wanted to change it, then he wanted to add
Yeah.
two, and then he said, okay, forget it, I'll go back, I'll think of three new
Mhm.
ones. And I was like, I told him flat out, I'm putting all of this in the book, like
Right.
that this is how you
Mhm.
are. So, that to me was interesting, but and I pointed out in the book, it was sort of a psychology thing. Like, I wanted to see if off the top of their head, you know if three people said the same song, or if, like, I sort of expected Hillary to give three songs that were really like off the beaten path, deep cuts, and
Mhm.
I just wanted to see
Mhm.
what they would say. And then, I was able to go from there and just turn that into something. And in addition, I wanted to do some sort of analysis of, of
Mhm.
just a few songs, in terms of, trying to dig in and see what stories were there. I love Annie
Mhm.
Zaleski's stories, the stories behind the songs, books
Oh yeah.
that she
Mhm.
does. I
Mhm.
love that concept. So it was a little bit influenced by that. Like, I wanted to see what would just come out of asking for some tracks and then digging from that point. And they gave
Mhm.
me a ton.
Uh-huh.
They gave me a ton of info. I don't know if they, expected me to use the info they gave me the way I did, but I did anyway. So
That's cool. That's cool. Was it an interesting process to kind of zoom in on specific songs from a band that you had been listening to so much? And I mean, imagine some of these songs are almost like second nature to you in your head, and somewhat was and often, like, sometimes I even find it can be easier to sort of analyze and dig into a song that you haven't heard that much before, because you don't
mhm.
have all these associations. You almost don't have to strip stuff back a little bit. Just curious, was it an interesting process to kind of be revisiting their music so closely in such a different context now, thinking about having to write about it rather than just enjoying it?
Yeah, there were some songs that I thought I knew super, super well, but it was really
Uh-huh.
parts of them that I really stuck with me. So when I dug in, I realized new things about them, or learned new things about those songs that hadn't occurred to me, about, not only about the songwriting itself, but like the production process, and
Hmm.
why this was done this way instead of that way. And then there were songs that I had not heard a single time, or if I had, I didn't
Oh
remember
wow.
them at
Uh-huh.
all,
Uh-huh.
that just blew my mind. like
That's
songs. I'm
cool.
like, I cannot believe I'm listening to this song for the first time. This song is unreal.
uh,
And that
that's cool.
and finding that out kind of, gave some color to the entire catalog as well. Like, wow, this, it kind of just it gave even more strength to my overall concept of like
Hmm.
this band's catalog has been overlooked by association. They're in a unique position of being part of this collective, where that's a unique thing, I think, among
Hmm.
bands, among artists, where if you're part of this collective, you're basically signing up to have your catalogs in a way not paid as much attention to if it
Right.
if you were just an autonomous band trying to make it.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an interesting question you bring up. I think relatively early on, like if they hadn't been part of the collective, how would that have changed their history? I mean, would they
Hmm.
still be a band together now? Would they have been gone off in different directions style wise? Would, all those kind of questions are interesting kind of counterfactuals to think about. But obviously, what they did decide shaped them so much.
Yeah, and still does. I mean,
Hmm.
it's extraordinary that this Elephant Six collective is still this,
Yeah.
you know, I mean,
Yeah.
I've made a couple posts on the Neutral Milk Hotel Reddit group, because, about the book, just to let people know, like, hey, there's some stuff about Jeff in here and so on. And
Hmm.
that is a very active group.
Oh.
There are people I saw on TikTok, like the amount of people who dressed like the cover of the Neutral Milk Hotel album for Halloween is quite extraordinary.
Right. That's wild. Another kind of theme that trickles through is this whole concept of all three in the context of
Hmm.
Elephant Six, because
Yeah.
you kind of put out the concept that like people might look at them as like the main bands as like an art band, a pop band, and a deep band,
Yep.
but it's kind of restrictive and a little bit oversimplifying because apples and stereo stuff could do all that, even
Hmm.
sometimes in the same song. I'm just curious how that theme kind of also motivated you through the book, too, because I think you kind of drop references to it relatively frequently throughout the book.
Yeah. In one of my conversations with Robert, I brought up this idea that I've always thought of,
Hmm. Hmm.
the three main Elephant Six bands that way, and that's why the Apples and Stereo kind of get overlooked because they're like, oh, they're just the sunny pop band.
Uh-huh.
And then he responded, we were all three. He said that to me. And so to me, that comment sort of, I was like, well, that's something I'm going to run with, because it encapsulated what he was just responding to what I said, and encapsulated what I said, and I then took him at his word and started
Hmm.
to flesh that out, because I already believed that about
Hmm.
about the Apples, that they are all three. They are art, they are deep, they are pop. But by him saying that, it allowed me to kind of just really dig in and kind of give examples of that, and show that through line, and show those different aspects in their songs.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think this book did what a lot of good books do. It made me want to listen to the records more than I had in the
Cool.
past, and I was listening to them a lot while I was reading it a little bit after. And it's like one of the things I think was interesting about them, which I do think you conveyed somewhat, was that they are poppy in a unashamed,
Hmm.
like they're not apologizing for being a pop band. There's some of their songs are so over the top pop that it's like it takes them into this like surreal pop realm or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
But I think it'd be easy. Even I probably did it at some point to hear a song like that and be like, well, they're one dimensional. They're a pop
Yep,
band,
yep.
And I think that what you did manage to get across, which I imagine was somewhat important, is that just because they're unashamedly pop doesn't mean there can't be more going on in the music.
Yeah, and I think that is the way it is for a lot of bands. But in this particular case, I find there's a lot of sadness in these songs, a
Yeah.
lot of a lot
Uh-huh.
of darkness in these songs, both in the songwriting and the production.
Hmm.
And I would send anyone right to, In the Airplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel, that people find to be this, very sort of dark record. And I'm like, the darkness you're hearing is Robert's production. You know, um,
Right. Right.
Eric Allen had pointed out, the bassist in the Apples had pointed out that, a lot of what, when I saw Neutral Milk Hotel play a reunion show at Prospect Park to 10,000 people, most of what the crowd is singing back to the stage are Robert's horn parts. All
Yeah.
all
Uh-huh.
those catchy horn parts were completely top down, left and right, written by Robert. And so, to me, like, that points out like the fact that there are these through lines that are not pop in these songs, and I'm just suggesting to people that go back and check this out, because that stuff exists, and you might be moved by it in a way that you haven't been moved by it before, or maybe even moved by it in a way that no music has moved you.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's totally possible for sure. As the process went along and you kind of got to a point where you think, okay, I've got the book shape, I've written out most of what I want to write.
Yeah.
I'm curious about two things. Number one, what the revision process was like for you. Like, did you work with the editor, or did you like read it over yourself many times and
Yeah.
also did you feel any need to show any of it to Robert or any other band members, or was that kind of thing that you wanted to hold off until the whole thing was finished and then get them see it that way?
Well, I had never done this before, so I actually asked my
Uh-huh.
editor. I was like, "Do I show it to them? What do I do?" Like, and he's
Uh-huh.
like, he's like, you can show it to them, for obviously some fact checking or so, and but I mean, in terms of like, showing it to them to try to get approval for your narrative or something, is like you're not doing that.
Uh-huh.
um, so after going past my deadline 3 times, I think.
Sure,
um,
sure.
I'd read it through enough where I, turned it in, and then, maybe, a couple weeks later, Jeff at J-Card got back to me with, his marked up copy, and
Hmm.
his notes were great. I agreed with almost all of them. That was obvious he had thoughtfully, read the book and really, had some thoughts and opinions and suggestions. In fact, there was a bonus chapter at one point because I had written an article for my Substack, similar in tone to this, a conversation with Robert about AI. And I was going to include that as a bonus chapter. And he's like, he goes, I don't think you need this. And, I just was like,
Mm-hmm.
I knew he was right. I just knew, I was like, yeah, just leave it on Substack. We don't need to pad it with this.
Uh-huh.
After that point, after that revision process, then I showed it to Robert. And I sent it to Hillary as well. It's funny. I don't think any of those guys even read. I know Robert did, but I don't think any of the other band read the other Elephant Six book that came out. I
Oh,
don't,
okay.
and
Uh-huh.
I kind of get it, because it's like,
Hmm.
I lived it, why would I want to? Why do I
Right.
want to?
Right, right.
But Robert did read it and had
Hmm.
most of what he had to say were about factual aspects
Mm-hmm.
and
Hmm.
little things. He had referred to Robert Pollard from Guided by Voices as Bob at one point. He's like, I really actually never really did call him Bob. I don't know why I said that. I really should say Robert.
Right.
you know
Uh-huh.
little things like that were important to him.
Hmm.
That obviously I would change. But that was the process, and everyone was, cool. I gotta say, I hope if I do this again, the process is as easy, because
Uh-huh.
everyone involved really respected, like, you're a writer writing a book. So
Hmm.
I'll give you, some feedback, but I'm not gonna try to like stand in the way of your art.
Uh-huh. That's great.
And I appreciate that. And as
Yeah.
someone who's worked with record labels a lot over the years, I will tell you it's not like that. So,
Right. Yeah, yeah. You would hope that, I mean, and it makes sense, even though it could have easily gone the other way. It makes sense knowing what I've learned about Robert from the book, is that it does seem like he would be very sensitive to the idea that, like, hey, this is somebody else's creative work. It's, and it involves me, so that's important, but it's not I can't control it. So.
yeah, his attitude seemed to be, his vibe seemed to be, if I try to control it, it'll just make the book bad. And
Right.
I will say, in our conversations a bunch of times, I said, hey, you're trying to steer the narrative, dude. Like, I actually, like, I busted him a bunch for trying to steer the
Uh-huh.
narrative, but I wasn't judgmental about it, because it's like, I get it. You don't want to look, you don't want to look bad.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, he took that accusation well too.
Hmm.
He didn't cop
Hmm.
to it, but he also didn't
Uh-huh.
he also didn't try to fight me on it either. So
Uh-huh. That's great. And that goes back to, I think, what you said before really makes sense, that knowing him well enough that you can be a little confrontational with him, and that you can be and you guys have some trust in each other, and you're not just
mhm.
doing it because I certainly, I mean, I've been writing a long time. I certainly still struggle with the idea that most of the time when I'm interviewing somebody, I'm like big fan of theirs. And so
Yeah,
the
yeah.
last thing I want to do is do anything that would make them upset with me. But you got to get past that a lot of times, and it seems like you had an opportunity to be able to get past that a little more easily because you already had that relationship with him.
Yeah, and just from 30 years of working with artists, especially artists on the
Yeah.
way up, where, maybe I've played a role in helping them get to the point where they think they can start having an attitude. um, I think ultimately artists appreciate, as they become they're the people they can trust start to become more and more scattered. They appreciate actually being spoken to, like,
Right.
hey, you're just some dude. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you're still some dude,
Yep.
so I think, like, not only Robert but anyone appreciates just being talked to, like they used to be talked to,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
instead of an extra layer of, like, I don't want to piss you off, or I don't want to, like, have you flee the interview, to quote Fargo, um
Yeah.
and so that, if I was going to do this again, or I would continue with that attitude, because I'm like, if you can just be honest with me, you're gonna look better in the end,
hmm
you know
Yeah. Totally, totally. And how about your own like internal kind of revision before you got the manuscript to the editor and showed it to the band? Like, what
Mhm.
kind of what did you find yourself doing in terms of revision? Like, are you kind of person like reads it out loud, or do you like jump to it and then come, read the whole thing, read part of it? And then like wordsmith it a lot. Just curious how your whole process was.
I do read out loud. Like, a lot of, like, what I
Mhm.
write, I'm like dictating, and then transcribing it.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
and because a lot of times I'll write, especially over the last couple of years, anytime I write a Substack article or anything, I do a podcast version of it as well. Um,
Oh, cool.
so I like the writing to be conversational. Again, just
hmm
to me, it goes to that entertainment factor. I like the idea of people feeling like, oh, I'm hanging out with Josh and reading this in
Uh-huh.
in a way.
Uh-huh.
So that is part of the revision process for me. Like, as I'm reading it, I'm like, is this fun to read? Does this,
Uh-huh.
is this in as I'm hearing this in my head, is it enjoyable?
Uh-huh.
In terms of the
Right.
words, and in terms of the
Mhm.
conversational tone of it, and also in terms of getting rid of stuff. Like, I'll say to myself, like, you don't need to say that. Like, I'll
Right.
say that, I'll say
Uh-huh.
that out loud sometimes. Like,
Uh-huh.
I'll realize, like, hey, you don't need to say that.
Right. Right.
Because
And I mean, it's a challenging thing because once you've read it, once you got to the point where you feel like you're sort of done and you need to just revise it some, the more you read it, the more it embeds it in your head and you start to not be able to have a perspective on the fact that maybe it doesn't need to be there. It's not an easy thing to tell yourself, "Oh, wait, I don't need that," because you've read it so many times. It's like, "Wait, that's part of the book." You
yeah,
know.
yeah. That's why, like, I use that as my editorial process. It's kind of like,
Uh-huh.
it's like, it's like, as soon as I go, it's almost like another voice, where it's like, I don't
Uh-huh.
know, Josh.
Yeah, yeah.
As soon as I hear that, I'm like, no, you do know. You're just like, you're being precious, because, like, well, I wrote these words.
Uh-huh.
It's like, nah, dude, you just reacted to your own words, like,
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
means, out of here.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
when I said about that bonus chapter, I was
Mhm.
basically hoping he'd tell me to take it out.
Uh-huh.
Like, I knew it really didn't belong there, so I was just waiting for someone else to say, like, what is this doing
Right.
here?
Right. That totally makes sense. Yeah. So I'm curious, after this is such a unique experience for writing a book, as we've talked about, I'm
Mhm.
curious if you do have some ideas of what you might do next, and because whatever you do next has got to be different from this because even if it's another band, you don't know them like you knew these guys. So I'm
Yeah.
curious if you don't necessarily have to have like specific ideas, but you have some imaginings of what kind of things you might want to tackle next.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have thought about, like, oh, Josh, if you're going to write another band bio at some point, like, you're
Uh-huh.
probably not. There's no way to have this same exact opportunity again. So,
Uh-huh.
if that did come around, I would just approach it the same way, like, hey, like, I'm gonna need access, and you're gonna need to know that I'm just gonna
hmm
talk to you in the way I talk to
hmm
anybody. And if you react negatively to that, unfortunately, that's going in. So, like,
Right.
so, like, let's so just be honest. And if you're honest, if your negative reaction is honest, and you're okay, and you're okay with it, then we're on the same page. I've been taking notes for a very, very long time for a nonfiction book that I want to call Won't
Mm.
Power. I used to be very, very heavy twice the size I am now, weight loss journey over the
Wow.
course of decades. And not
Oh,
only
wow.
just that portion of my personal growth
Mm-hmm.
journey, but just like
Mm-hmm.
how that ties into personal growth in general, trying to
Mm-hmm.
like recover from trauma, trying to figure out, hey, what the fuck is wrong with me, and and what do I do about it
Uh-huh.
to
Oh,
become
wow. Mm-hmm.
a better version of myself, and so on.
Uh-huh.
So, and this would be, owing to my writing style, this whole experience would be part of that as well. Of just,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm going to commit to writing a book. I have no fucking idea how to do that. And
Right.
but I'm just going to take the challenge on. So
Mm.
that's an idea for a book that I've been taking notes for a very long time, that I'm in a
Cool.
position now where, oh, I know how to write a book.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
So now I can take those ideas and those notes that I've been collecting and, coalesce that into something that resembles a book, because I've accomplished that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's something I want to do. I write frequently on Substack in a very similar way.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote what I thought was a movie review of the new Spike Lee movie that turned into a 9,000 word piece. Uh,
Wow.
and that's the latest thing I've published on there. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm, like I told you earlier about leaving the music industry, I'm just in this
Mm-hmm.
process of like telling myself, like, Josh, just generate a body of work, generate
Mm-hmm.
work, write every day. I do a daily series on TikTok. Write every day, put everything you have into it, be honest, be open, be forthright,
Mm-hmm.
and become become the writer that you're imagine yourself being able to become by
Mm-hmm.
writing,
By doing it. Yeah.
by just
That's
doing it.
cool. Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Now that you mentioned all that, I feel like I would really love to, although I don't know if you'd like to write it, but I'd really love to be like a memoir of being in promotion, because such a wild world
Oh
promoting
my God.
music and you
Jesus
know,
Christ.
man, the stories I'm
Uh,
sure you could tell is
there's
be
some
like
stories
crazy.
I can't tell legally, unfortunately.
Right.
Some stories
Right.
about
Right.
people that some stories about people who people think of a certain way that they probably wouldn't think of them that way anymore.
Yeah, I bet.
That I cannot tell. I'm not far enough away from it yet. I will say
Right.
the music industry is just, there's just not, it's nice that it brings some artists to public recognition who deserve that.
Uh-huh.
After that, I don't know, I'm having a hard time coming up with positive things to say about the music industry.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was a
It's hard to
living
find
for a
them.
very long time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, a
Yeah.
living at the expense of other people who probably are still paying back whatever promotion dollars are spent on me to a record label.
Well, yeah, well, unfortunately, that's the way the industry works, unfortunately,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, but no, I mean,
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. I mean, I
Mhm.
think a lot of books have been written about the music industry. I'm scared of what I might say.
Right. Right. That totally makes sense. That's funny. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for talking to me about your book. It was a great read. I really enjoyed it, and like I said, it hits that perfect mid spot between. I'm sure fans of the band are going to love it, but you don't have to know anything about it to enjoy it. So I
Well,
really appreciate it.
your feedback meant a lot to me. It really did, Mark. And
Oh,
I really,
great.
really appreciate you reading it and for talking to me
Hmm.
about it.
My pleasure. Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
The Music Book Podcast is produced, edited, and hosted by Marc Masters. Our theme music is by the great band Savak. Our logo was designed by Walter Carlton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating and a review wherever you hear it. And thanks so much for listening.